Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today our special guest is Joe Tesone, and Joe is the founder of onCORE. And we want to give Joe some time to give us an encore, but it's spelled a little bit differently than when I go to Rolling Stones concerts. It's encore, like turned on. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Joe.
Thank you, Sean. Very honored to be here on a lovely Sunday morning and beautiful weather out here in the Albany, New York area. Yeah, I'm the co-founder of onCORE Origination. onCORE is a project origination company. We work in the solar, battery, and EV space, and our main purpose is to originate land for IPPs and developers across the country. What makes us a little bit unique, we don't like to be painted with a brush as landmen per se. We're not full-scale developers, although we all have a very strong tenure of doing development in our careers, but we really work collaboratively with an IPP to go out and find projects based on their criteria for battery storage, solar, and also EV. EV is a smaller part of our business. We're probably 50% battery, 50% solar, and we work in the DG space and the utility scale space. This year alone, we've originated about 140 projects across the country. These are all vetted projects and landlord signed paper on our client's paper. So we're really a machine that is built to find good projects for our customers and really save them bandwidth and time and resources. We put a strong focus on building relationships with the stakeholders. And at the end of the day, we want to have projects that end up getting built. And we've been doing this for about 8 years. Me and my partner and I have an extensive background in development. I started out in the wireless industry back in the mid-90s, developed thousands of projects for cell towers, companies like Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, and parlayed this experience into the renewable industry starting in 2017, and kind of just did it because we were just burnt out in telecom and wanted something different and learned the space, and we've done some of our own development too. So we're very good at doing development and finding good projects for our customers.
Yeah, well, solar energy sort of is wireless anyway. It's coming from the sun. I don't see any conductors coming from the sun. Have you ever seen any? Like, do they have like DC or AC? What is the sun? No, I can't. I'm just messing around.
I think it's DC, right? And then it goes to AC.
Yeah, once it hits the solar cells, then it turns that electromagnetic radiation into direct current, but it's wireless. It's electromagnetic radiation, just like what you see coming out of the cell towers, or actually coming out of the cell towers, you don't see it because it's invisible electromagnetic radiation, because the wavelength for a cell tower is really long. That's why it can go through the walls. And then the visible light is a much shorter wavelength and it can't go through the walls. Or, I can't see it coming through the walls. Can you? I don't.
No. It's one of the things that we countered is, satellite is going to, take a place of cell towers, and satellite technology doesn't penetrate. That's why if you're inside and, it doesn't work. It's an interesting business. Again, been in it for a long time, and a cell tower, not to digress too much into this, but all a tower is a building to hold antennas. Like if you look at most of the towers in the world, in the country, are owned by vertical real estate companies, American Tower, Crown, SBA, that's a company I work for. And then companies like Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, they co-locate on the existing infrastructure with their antennas. It's basically probably 8% of the cell towers are not owned by the carriers.
I've got Verizon. I'm kind of mad at them. It's my Wi-Fi calling's not work. Do you know who I should call?
I have no idea. I mean, the network, when you go into different evolutions of technology, went from 3G to 4G to 5G, the capacity increases, you need more sites, but also the coverage decreases. So that's why areas where you probably had really good coverage at one point, now you're like, why isn't my phone working very well? So it's a real, plus these networks are so strained now with data. Like when I got into business in the 90s, I think the 50% of the world or the country had cell phones. Now it's over 100% because people have multiple devices and
Hmm.
data. So it's really interesting. Like if you ever go to a stadium or even like a conference center, they actually have what's called in building or DAS. They have systems inside the
Oh yeah,
venues.
that's
So
interesting. Like a
yeah,
repeater or something like
yeah,
that.
repeaters, antennas. Yeah, and I mean even when you're already plus, there's probably some areas you're like, why isn't my phone working too well? Or I can't,
Hmm.
download a video.
Yeah, I bought a cell phone, I guess they call it a signal booster, because I'm in between some hills
Yep.
and I need to set that up. I just got too busy, but that's
Yeah,
something that I need to do.
I mean, I do call over Wi-Fi at my house, and there's a cell tower half mile away. So
Hmm.
if Wi-Fi is not working, I'm getting very poor cell reception. But there's a really good synergy between what we did in development in the cell tower business to what we do in the renewable energy business, because I look at this, we're very passionate about development and coming from telecom, which is a little bit, it's a younger industry, as compared to like, let's say doing, oil and gas, but it is older than renewables. And
Hmm.
what I noticed getting into this business, and this is really one of the impetus for starting onCORE, was that this industry doesn't do a great job in development overall. So this is where we come in. I mean, we look at this as a real estate business, not the enter. It's not really. It's like the make. I always go back to Ray Kroc and McDonald's, and we're in the real estate business that just happens to sell hamburgers. It's really a real estate driven business because you could have all the technology in the world, all the money in the world, all the policy in the world, but if you cannot have a landowner sign on a dotted line and then get that project satisfactorily permitted, then you don't have anything. So that's where we really put a lot of our time and onus.
So when you were first coming on here, you talked about originating land and IPP, and I was trying to think of funny things that IPP might stand for. International People Power. I don't know, but I know it means independent power producer.
Yeah,
Maybe you could explain a little bit more too of what an independent power producer is and how you interact with them. And you also mentioned DG, and a lot of people know that that means distributed generation. That means you're making power where you're using it instead of 100 miles away or something like that. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about that real estate angle, the independent power producers, and how you develop.
sure. I mean, you just defined it in as an independent power producer. They're mostly in deregulated markets, like which most of the markets in the United States, minus the Southeast for the most part, are deregulated, where instead of having a utility like a National Grid or NextEra, who are Duke Power, where they control pretty much all the utility infrastructure and also you have to go through the utility. Several years ago, I don't know when, but these markets started being deregulated, so a company can, like Catalyze Energy, RWE, Key Capture, they're all some names you probably heard of that are independent power producers. So they're able to get a license in a particular state and actually own solar or battery and actually sell the power into the grid. We also use the word developer. Sometimes we work for companies they don't own the system. They'll just develop it all the way to shovel ready, for lack of a better word, and then sell it to an independent power producer. I hope does that adequately define it for the folks
Yeah,
that are.
yeah, because if you just think of the words independent power producer, you could think that maybe I am, because if I have solar over my head, I'm making my own power, but that's not really what is meant by an IPP. What they have to be registered, I guess?
Yeah, I don't know the complete dynamics behind that,
Mhm.
but basically they have to go out and there's certain parameters that they have to show and then they register as an independent power producer. And I mean, we have companies that we work for that are multi-billion dollar global conglomerates. Like, for instance, most of like NextEra has an arm that's an independent power producer, but they get registered, they license, and there's some companies we work for that are 7 people and they own a couple projects, but they're independent producers. So I don't know exactly what goes on to behind the scenes. We just work for them. And then we
Yeah, and
work
I
for
know.
some developers that are companies that just go out and source projects and then again develop them to and then sell them when they're all permitted. DG, going back to your second part of the question, distributed generation, that is just for laymen, it is really, easiest way to explain it, we get this all the time, is, you have the high transmission lines you drive around, they're usually over roads and they're big towers and with big wires hooked to them. They're usually the 115, 240, 315 kV. The transmission lines go from the power plants to the substations. And at the substation level, like in my town, probably has 3 substations in upstate New York. You have all the, the telephone poles. So it goes from the big wires, and I'm really making this simple, go to the substations from the power plant, then the substation like a big spoke. The power at my house right now, there's telephone poles outside in the front, and that's distributive generation. Usually it's lower voltage, 4 kV, 13 kV lines. And that's what most of the community solar projects are hooked into, are these distributive lines. And
So after the substation.
yeah,
Great. Yeah, and so we talk about like high voltage, medium
yeah.
voltage, and then the utility people, they call it low voltage when it comes to our buildings. So it's kind of funny to think of something like, 480 volts as low voltage. So don't test that with your fingers or your tongue.
Exactly. For most solar projects, in battery, you need a 13 kV line. That's usually the average, at least in New York. Some markets are 12 kilowatt kV lines, and you need 3-phase power. And that's one of the challenges that right now, especially in mature markets like New York or Massachusetts, where when I first started doing this 7-8 years ago, I remember, when community solar in New York was kind of getting its legs, you go out to a area and there would be no projects on the substation and no projects on the feeder. So you actually had like pick of the litter, where I remember developing like 100 and our sourcing projects for a company like 150 or 60 megawatts of community solar projects within a year or two. Most of those now are built and operational. What we see now, and again, I'll just speak to New York, but it's similar in other states, where you could have a great piece of land and a good zoning code, but there's the substation and the feeder, the circuit, are at max. So, and then you'll go into the interconnection queue, where companies, when they first submit their application to the utility, and you'll see a backlog of 3 or 4 projects. And then the issue with that is when you get your impact study back, the utilities say, sure, you could connect your 5 megawatt AC solar project, but it's going to cost you $4 million because you have to reconductor 3 miles of lines or put a new transformer in the substation. And at that point, it's just not economical. So a lot of the projects we do, Sean, will go out and, we know enough about how to look at the hosting capacity maps with the utility, but and our clients will take a risk on the project, but a lot of them die on the vine just because of that interconnection, basically the clogging of the interconnection.
Yep. And energy storage should be the cure for a lot of this stuff. So you put the energy storage where you're using it, and then you can, charge it slowly, and then you use it fast.
That is, it definitely solves some of the problems. However, what we're finding is the utilities, there's so many like New York, for instance, Con Edison, New York City area mainly, the Con Ed just announced that like 70-80% of their substations now, they don't want to accept any more applications because for battery storage. The utility looks at battery storage that, sure, you're charging the battery. There's a lot of, you're basically going from an analog, peaker plant type of system to now very digital system, that battery storage that operates in nanoseconds. But they always look at, like, once you're outputting like 1 electron onto the grid, they look at that as, you have to have that 5 megawatts of capacity. So they're looking at it similarly to solar, that it is, they got to make sure that that the can handle, even though you'll never throw 5 megawatts of power onto the grid in a really short duration. So we're seeing that. And then also the utilities, Sean, they're not used to this. I mean, if you think about the utility, they've been around for 140 years, depending on how you're counting. They're very in the box thinkers. They don't like this. There's a lot of pressure. I don't want to say the utility. I mean, you got to work hand in hand for them. But if you look at some of the states this year, like Iowa, for instance, where they propose a good community solar program, the utilities are the ones lobbying against it. So they're not a huge fan of this. I'm not saying this in all the time in every state, but I mean, they do work with you, and it's going to be a problem because the amount of demand that we need, especially with AI coming online, the utilities, the infrastructure is just not there to support the level of energy and renewables that we need.
Yeah, and I think that there's different rules that utilities have, just the way that they've evolved. And they're like a natural monopoly. It's not like you're going to have two sets of wires come into your house. And they have it set up so they can make a modest profit, so they can stay in business, because, most utilities are private, they would say, so that they have to make some money. And if they build lots of construction projects, they can increase that percentage of profit that they can make, so they can make more money for their shareholders by building huge construction projects instead of doing something like putting energy storage at different nodes along the grid, where they're just, buying electricity from somebody else. Perhaps if they built the energy storage projects themselves, they would make more money than if they bought it from somebody else, because it's like they're marking up their construction projects, their big transmission lines and all that kind of stuff. And so if they can come up with a reason why they need that, 5 megawatts, as you were saying, then they could make more money than if they didn't need to upgrade anything at all by putting energy storage in different places. So perhaps just as time goes on and policy will change, then we will see more energy storage in different places. Because one way of looking at it is, if everybody just has rooftop solar in their neighborhoods and community solar all over the place, the grid infrastructure would be more like for topping off our batteries when there's not as much of a sunny day, or even for sending electricity from our neighborhoods to some other place, some other neighborhood or some factory. So it's sort of like you were in the cell phone industry previous to the solar industry, and it was a huge disruptive market. It was like, I remember we had long distance companies for our landlines, and they were kind of expensive, and we have to pay for long distance phone calls, and we'd be on the phone going like, man, that's 10 cents a minute or whatever it was for me to call you. And now look at us, we're doing video calls and things like that. So we just have to wait for the markets to catch up with what's happening.
Yeah, no, that I 100% agree with you. The utilities, they don't, especially in the deregulated markets, I think they look at this as more of a pain per se. However, when you go into areas like, you look at Florida, Georgia, sometimes they lead every year in the amount of renewable products they put online, but the utilities control that. They're sourcing them, they're getting the most of the benefit out of them. I mean, when you get into the utility scale, we talked about a high voltage. It's a little bit of a different game because the utility is just buying the power at a wholesale rate. It's basically a volume scale type of thing. So it's just another, if you look at ERCOT in Texas and how much the demand is over there, down in Texas I just digressing into ERCOT, it's really interesting. Last year now, obviously, unless if you just don't ever pay attention to the news, we have an administration that is very anti-renewables, solar, mainly solar and wind is getting beat up every day. And not to get political, but it's just more of an ideological battle right now. So with all this said, Texas had a pending bill, I think it was like mid-year, right around the time when the big beautiful bill was being negotiated and worked out. And it was the Republicans. Now Texas is a very oil dominated, fossil fuel dominated state. there was some legislation that was pending, and it might even pass in one of the houses in Texas, basically making the permitting framework for solar almost impossible. It was almost comical because it was more aesthetically based. But if you've ever been down to Texas, the Gulf of Texas, you have miles of refineries. Is pretty much the ugliest thing from a land use perspective. But again, we need it, the refinery. So, and actually the bill was, I believe it wasn't passed in one of the houses, and it was vetoed, or maybe even never got to the governor. But that just shows you that here you have sort of a quasi deregulated market in a very oil-backed economy, and they shot this down because they know they need this. And now we're going to start to see utility with, going last year, 85% of the plant capacity was wind and solar. And a lot of these projects are going away now because of tax credits and being eliminated. So you're going to have a supply and demand issue, and we're seeing it already. Utility bills are going to go up, and there's going to be more of a need for renewables. And my, fear is that the messaging, because the current, they have the megaphone, they have louder voices, and they will say whatever they want to say. And people are going to start seeing their utility bills go up, and it's going to be blamed on renewables, which is absolutely ridiculous, and it's the actual opposite. So I think our industry needs to get out in front of this, and every time you see an article or someone say on the new, in the speech that, your utility bills are going up because of field renewable power. No, this has got to be slammed down, and the rhetoric's got to stop. The industry has to come out and say, BS, it's actually quite the opposite. And that's why your utility bills are going up. So we'll wait and see, but it's going to be an interesting couple of years.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking it's interesting that you got to pay for electricity. And when it's a tax credit, it comes out of taxes somewhere else, I guess you could say. So you're paying for electricity that way. And when they get rid of the tax credits, then you just have to pay for it with higher electricity prices. So the solar industry, it's like we're the least expensive, solar and wind, the least expensive type of electricity out there. So we're gonna do fine. Just the electric bills are gonna go up. And yeah, of course, they blame everything on us. Anyway, if it's just, it's kind of funny that politicians, talking heads, and all that kind of stuff, that they're just going to go through stuff and figure out every negative. It doesn't matter what makes common sense. That they're just going to anything that supports what they're saying, that's what they're going to say. It's sort of like these days too, there's so much in the way of different channels that you could look at, that you don't have anything that's very balanced anymore. You get one side or the other. It's kind of hard to go back to the days of ABC, NBC, and CBS, where you would have somebody selling you news that wants both sides to listen to it. But just
we're so divided right now that there's a misrepresentation of facts across the board. And it's always, people will believe what they want to believe because, like you said, Sean, there's 20 outlets out there that if someone says, I see it all the time on social media. There'll be just friends of friends just spewing out articles about how wind is bad and solar is bad. And it's just so wrong. I mean, factually, it's just not right. And all for a debate. I mean, nothing's perfect. I mean, everyone flipped out about, oh my God, we're going to end all these tax credits. Well, arguably, okay, maybe 10 years was a little too long of a time, but you don't pull the rug out of an industry. There's a balance there.
Sudden changes are crazy.
All that. I mean, battery storage just sort of got spared in this. And also as an industry too, though, we need to, at this point now, we have to be able to exist without these subsidies. And that's the reality of the situation. And I think, and I love it. I wish the tax credit was 80%, right? Selfishly for our business. But
what about 180?
A lot of prices you start to run a business based on that comfort level of, we have this, and prices increase, and now necessity is the mother of invention. And if we can't succeed without relying on China for all the materials and without a 30% plus ITC credit in a few years, then we need to evaluate, are we doing the right thing here? And I know what people are going to say, well, the oil industry has been subsidized for 1,000 years, and this guy it's like when my daughter, Olivia did this. And no, worry about yourself. We got to focus on what we know there's right now. We have had wins. We've had a nice run of tailwinds, but we'll be fine. I mean, whenever you have one of the higher ups, Exxon, I wish I had this in front of me, just said this, anti-wind policy is not smart. NextEra's CEO keeps on beating the drum that, no, we need renewables. The Microsofts of the world, Facebooks of the world, they realize that they can't do this all on just fossil fuel plants. The wait for gas turbines, the expense, there's a million things. I'm not saying we shouldn't do gas too, but it's a 10-year, proposition right now. Nuclear is awesome, but it'll solve a lot of problems. But good luck getting any nuclear permitted in 90% of the states. It's just not I mean, pursue it, absolutely. We should pursue all energy, but the reality is, when you get back down to solar, and I'll specifically say solar, it is the more inexpensive, quicker way to get electrons onto the grid. And that is what it is,
Yep.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSEAN, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show.
One thing too that you just mentioned, or as you said, that energy storage got spared when we're talking about the getting rid of the tax credits and all that kind of stuff with the politics. How would you say that energy storage was spared?
Yeah, good question. Well, let's just move back. When Trump got elected, he was basically saying he's going to big green scam, get rid of all Biden's 10-year tax credits, the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. So he had pushed really hard in his bill, but there's been some moderates on the House and Senate to basically push back, saying we can't do that. It's going to kill the industry. So there was a big debate between the House and the Senate. And so at the end of the day, what ended up happening, which is somewhat of a compromise, is for solar and wind, the tax credits, the 30% investment tax credit, is expiring you have to have the start of construction before July 4th of 2026, or have the system complete on the grid, PTO'd, by 12/31/2027. So it really
that's for business,
for solar and wind,
systems. Yeah.
So it gives the industry a little bit of breathing room right now, and there's not to get.
So let's say those dates again. July.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's July. You have to have started construction. Because basically what they did is they gave a year, 12, because originally the Republicans, the staunch, the quote fiscal conservatives, wanted these credits to end immediately, and basically just said, hey, if your system's not PT permission to operate, that's when a utility allows you to connect to the grid by 12/31/2027, you're done. The issue with that is, let's say you have a project that starts construction, and you have all this money, funds committed to it, and out of your control, whether it's the permitting authority, the grid, weather, you don't get your system developed by 12/31/2027, what do you do then? You just lost everything. So what the compromise was, you have a year. So if the project starts construction before July, we'll say July of 2026, you're sort of grandfathered in. So let's say that project takes 3 years to build. Because of delays, you still have some leg room there to do that. And then also, not to get too granular, but start of construction is defined by if you procure a certain percentage of materials, you start physical construction. So that was a whole other issue with this. So developers and IPPs have a 3 or 4 year runway right now, if they're smart, to be able to get projects up and built. Now, Battery does not fall into that. The tax credits for battery storage, energy storage, stay into effect until, I want to say, 2032. So they have the 10 years from 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act did not go away for battery storage. So they have those long lead times now. That's a lot of time, 6-7 years. I mean, it goes by fast, but they don't have that pressure. So those credits are still there. So if you build a battery project in 2030, you're going to get a 30% ITC.
Great.
The other issue, though, with all of this is the FIAC, foreign entity of concern, which is basically, let's call it what it is, it's China. So if you're buying materials from China, which most of the batteries and a lot of the panels are purchased from China, you have until the end of this year to procure those materials. It's called safe harboring, or you are not going to be eligible for the tax credit. And there's a certain percentage breakdown. You could even, if you're really interested, I could, it's all out there. You could, so that's putting some pressure on the industry. But
what if you're getting the materials for China, it's the end of the year, and it's on the container, but it's 1 inch from the loading dock?
I believe it's the procurement of it's called safe harboring. So if you actually procure
it's in the harbor. Yeah.
Yeah, safe harbor. So if you procure,
so it goes under the Golden Gate, you're good.
Yeah, I believe so. And there's some semantics in the bill, and there's guidelines. Tax attorneys are analyzing this stuff now. So I'm not an expert in that. No, I don't think someone's just going to rely on me for this. But there's some. You don't have to have like the physical equipment, I believe, inside your warehouse, but there might be some rules around that too. Like you have to expend the money, and again, don't quote me on it, but there are some semantics revolving around that. But it'll be, the industry has to adapt to it, and certainly, it's whenever you take something away, there's going to be losers, there's going to be effect to it, and we're seeing it already.
You know what I was thinking too is there might be some strategy here, because when you are letting tax credits for wind and solar expire, then there's going to be a whole bunch of activity all at once. There's going to be an increase of activity. The numbers are going to look really good for a shorter period of time, which makes Trump look good for the midterms.
Yeah, you're going to see a flurry of activity right now. I mean, I know a lot of the customers we speak to, they are frantically procuring materials and getting construction done. I mean, things are definitely moving at a very fast pace to meet some of these deadlines. And it will have a little bit of a flurry of activity, to your point. I don't know how much, what dent that's going to put into, let's say, jobs reports, what have you. But we're seeing layoffs in the industry now. We're seeing projects that are shelved. We're seeing companies pull out of certain states. So I think overall it's going to have a negative effect in the next couple of years versus a positive effect, at least from a number of projects that are actually being
But I'm
built.
sure there's going to be a lot of people putting in piles and assembling racks and stuff, like a whole lot more than there would have been, just to get stuff in time.
Oh, yeah, 100%. We're seeing it now already. I mean, there's a lot of activity of being able to do that, where maybe a company was, maybe was going to take their time breaking ground on a project. Now they're going to be, hey, we said of starting this in, maybe they would wait until March or April when the weather's nice to start it. In the Northeast, they might say, we got to start it now. And that's happening every day as we speak, to your point.
Yeah, I almost wonder if they were trying to figure out some kind of midterm strategy, and then once those midterms are over, maybe they'll bring us a new tax credit. Instead of giving Biden credit, they'll call it Trump's big beautiful tax credit.
And anything's possible. I think I don't know if there's a strategy. I don't think the leadership focuses that far ahead. I believe this was more of a move to do away with the predecessor's policy. I mean, if you remember during Trump's first administration, I mean, he wasn't a fan of renewables per se, but he didn't really mess with the industry. If anything, the ITC was going to go down to 26%, and he actually put a bumped it up to 30%, let it stay at 30%. And he wasn't beating the drum anti-renewables because the ITC, I mean, at the end of the day, and I say this to my friends and people that aren't familiar with the industry, like when you go to these conferences, it's not a bunch of tree huggers, tie-dye shirts. I mean, it's investment bankers, it's heads of construction companies, EPC firms, developers. It's a very capitalistic driven industry. And when policy changes, you're not hurting the previous administration, you're hurting bankers and people that relied on the ITC, which is a lot of the administration's friends. So to your point, could we see a shift for the midterms? Potentially, especially if the Democrats take the House and Senate. But I don't know. I think this administration is just locked in, and it's not really logical. I don't think it's based on logic. It's more based on a policy to redo what Biden did at the end of the day. So we'll wait and see. We just got to move forward, and you can't stop development. I've written some articles on this too on LinkedIn, being in development for 30 years. Through my experience, what I've seen is the most successful companies are the companies that figure out how to continue to develop in times of peril. I saw this in telecom after 9/11. I mean, the land that you're leasing today is the project you're building 3 to 4 years from now. So you can't just put everything on hold. You have to keep moving the ball forward, albeit maybe do it a little bit more conservatively or judiciously, but you can't just stop. Because if you stop, you're not going to have a pipeline, at the end of the day. You don't know what. I mean, I was just paid out on a project that I leased 7 years ago. I mean, 7 years. I mean, this was a project in New England that got caught up in an interconnection study, and there was all sorts of hair on the project, but if you think about 7 years, we've had 2 administrations, you've had state incentive policy changes, federal policy changes. So that's how long things take. And sometimes.
Yeah. That's a long time. All right. So let's see. Is there anything else that you want to cover right now?
No, I think this is a really good discussion, Sean,
Yeah.
and we covered a lot of ground, and I really thank you. I think you're doing a wonderful thing out there, and you're an old timer in this industry, I guess, 17 plus years. It's been 8 years for me, and the amount that I've learned, and it's an exciting business, and the people are great, and there's just a lot of good people that are just trying to get stuff built, and it's a good thing. It's right now, I mean, the message I say is obviously climate change is very important, but the message that I think resonates with people the most is energy costs. Your energy bills are going to go up, and we have a demand. We're competing against China and other countries for AI dominance. So we need every electron that we can get onto the grid in the next decade plus, and that has to come from all types of energy, and we just can't be myopic and say, oh, this one, we can only do this one, or we can only do that one. We need everything that makes sense. I mean, we don't want to have coal plants in the middle of our neighborhoods, and I don't think that's a reality. We didn't even get to talk about that, but let people throw that out there, and it'll never happen in most areas. But we just need to be pragmatic and work together. I mean, this us versus them strategy is not going to work. It's going to be harmful. It never works. The Lincoln said, not to get corny, but, a nation divided cannot succeed, or I probably butchered that quote, but or cannot stand. And he's right. And right now we have to come together as a country and do what's best. And there's always going to be some winners and losers.
God bless America. And so another thing that's just kind of interesting is I recently got some property, and I got a letter from a developer that wants to develop an energy storage project. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I've talked to a few different people about it. And there's a substation, but there's property between myself and the substation. And so it's probably like a 10% chance something like that would work.
Not to get in, I looked at it, there's some hair on that. It's going to be a challenge.
But I just thought it was kind of interesting because I'm in the business, and then all of a sudden that happens. And so you're a developer. So what kind of people are you looking for doing business with?
Meaning from a Joe landowner type of, or actually our customers?
Or what, somebody listening to the podcast and they're like, oh, I want to do some business with Joe Tesone.
Yeah, I mean, really, IPP, independent power producers and big developers. I mean, those are our core customers, and any of the, is PV, DG, like I said, we EV charging. I mean, we're looking at some properties for data centers now. We're not to be braggadocious, but we're just very good at what we do. I mean, I don't think there's a company that has originated more battery storage projects in the country than we have. I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds, and New York City alone, a couple hundred projects for battery storage. Now, albeit not all those are going to be built, like we said before, because of just interconnection strains. And it's not bragawatts. I mean, these are fully vetted. We might look at 50 properties to get the right project for our customer, and they have to sign off on it. And we work with the landowner, we liaison between the landowner and our clients. So we're a typical solar DG or battery DG project. I mean, you're probably talking about $8 to $9 to $10 million. You look at a utility scale. I mean, you're talking about $150 million project potentially for batteries. I mean, these aren't cheap projects, and they take a long time, and land control is the key. I mean, we go into markets where I spoke to someone the other day where the gentleman was like, you're the fifth person this year who sent me a letter or called me because he's got a nice piece of property. It's close to a substation. It's in a market that has a program. And he was very reluctant to do anything. And, a lot of times it takes a lot of work. There's a lot of calls and follow-ups. So it's not just, there's a lot of tools out there, and we use these tools that make it easier to search property and give you the floodplain layers and the zoning. But at the end of the day, it's a contact sport. You have to be in front of these property owners. You have to be in front of the stakeholders. That's what really differentiates being really good at this to being average at it. And once you get the project under site control, there is a lot of management, and we don't do that part. We just originate. So what we found too, and I can speak for hours on this, I know time is coming to a close, is that we find a lot of our customers, they say, every customer we work, Sean, has origination teams. We already have people that do this. That's great. Every customer does that, has our origination teams. But what ends up happening is, and I went through this when I did some development, is the origination team, they get sucked into the vortex of actually development. So where there should be prospecting, they're sitting there getting on calls dealing with title issues and easement issues and zoning issues. So we are just a machine that goes out there that effectively works collaboratively with our customers, and we zero in, and we will work a property or properties for months to get the right project. And some markets it's easier, it's a new market, people haven't been hit up yet. It's a lot easier than going to a state like Massachusetts or Maryland where every property owner has been contacted 6 times. But sometimes it's the 7th time, and having the right, we're very professional, having the right tact, that's what gets the deal done.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Joe Tassone of onCORE. And that is ONCORE. And I'm sure everybody's going to be calling you now for their nice big properties, and hopefully they're near substations. I'm sure you probably get a lot of calls from people, and you look and you're like, you're not anywhere near a substation.
Yeah. That we say to our customers too, it's not only what we give you, it's what we don't give you. We just don't throw stuff over the email and say, hey, what about this? But there's it's like anything else. The great properties, you have a lot of interest. You get 10 miles, you might I get emails and calls, hey, I got this great property, I want to put solar on it. And unfortunately, you look at it, it's 3 miles from 3-phase, or it's on the side of a mountain. But every so often, you do get a solicitation where like, wow, this lines up well.
Maybe we could figure out a new way to beam electricity from those places with lasers going to space.
Yeah, that would be fun, right? Exactly.
All right. Okay, well, thank you so much, Joe Tesone of onCORE, and thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Make sure to get yourself the NABCEP Energy Storage Installation Professional Certification, because, as Joe just said, energy storage got spared, and there's going to be different layoffs, but there's also going to be, I think, an employment boom in different sectors. There might be people moving around in the industry a little bit because there's a big boom to get things done. So make sure that you get yourself certified and educated to survive the turbulence in the solar coaster. Woo!